Well, it's funny because in that interview when he said, he kept talking about being of service, so it's as if he's still actually in the John Wick character.
And for the interview, he's
wearing the suit.
He's dressed like you are. He's wearing the suit. He's got a black shirt. He's got a black suit. It's like he is John Wick.
And that weird destination wedding, he's still got the John Wick hair and beard arrangement. So he obviously made that in the gaps in between. So as he said, it picks up exactly where John Wick 2 ends. He's about to be excommunicated, which means that he's got to now get away from this team of highly trained assassins. I think the price tag starts at 14 million, and then as he continues to survive, obviously, it goes up. And as Keanu Reeves was saying in that interview, it sort of opens out the world. We go off to these kind of desert locations, which almost have a kind of kung fu feel. He's told at one point, you go there, you walk as far as you can, and then you walk a little bit further, and then you collapse, and then, blah, blah, blah. So it's got a much more, it has that expansive feel about it. In that interview, you were talking about the scene with the book, and I had written down death by book as being a particular highlight. And he said, yes, it's weapons of opportunity, which I think is a really great phrase. Not weapon of choice, but weapons of opportunity, horse foo, and indeed dog foo.
Yes,
I mean the dog foo sequence was actually one of my favourites with Halle Berry and the highly trained man's best friend, woman's best friend, and the motorcycles and swords with a French connection thing. Because at one point they're going under the L train. So, I mean, very much like Gareth Evans' film The Raid, in which I talked about that in terms of it being a musical. I talked about the fight sequences in that as being balletic and having that kind of fleet-footed grace of a Hollywood musical. And it was interesting that in that interview, you brought up the Harold Lloyd, because the movie does flag this up. And Keanu Reeves said, yes, that's absolutely an influence. So you're looking back to the great silent comedians like Harold Lloyd, Buster Keaton, people who were doing incredibly physical comedy. And that's why he said, I think, quote unquote, gags, or in inverted commas, gags, because yes, they're gags because you laugh at them, but they are stunts that are done astonishingly, and they all have to be choreographed absolutely to within an inch, because they're very, very dangerous stunts. But when you see them, they seem, light and effortless, because that's what that kind of choreography looks like. And that also reminded me of the thing that Sam Raimi said about The Evil Dead. It wasn't really a horror film. It was a Three Stooges movie with blood and guts standing in for custard pies. So when from the outset, when you look at a film like this, which is on the surface fantastically violent and all about death and destruction, of course, that's actually not what you get from the film at all. What you get is that it's choreographed and that it's balletic and that it's sort of weirdly, it has that sort of weird cinematic joyfulness as all this carnage is happening, which I think for me worked better in this film than it had in the previous John Wicks, which I had kind of, I had not entirely taken to. I remember when you saw your first John Wick film, you did think, what on earth is just the level?
Because I'd missed the first one, so I was not quite prepared
for the sheer level of.
I was prepared for this one,
and also that what you get is you get those. I remember I interviewed Keanu Reeves years and years ago when he had made The Devil's Advocate. And he was standing outside a lift with Charlize Theron, who was, I don't know whether I told you this story before, and he was showing her some of his kung fu moves that he had been learning because he'd been doing The Matrix. And he was literally standing next to me, and he put one of his feet up by his head, because he clearly throws himself into this training and can do so. It is a very physical performance, and it is something that he can do very well. And the fight sequences are choreographed really well, and he is surrounded by other performers, and choreographed fighters who are all giving it 100%. And you do get some of that breathless feeling that you do in The Raid, or that you get in, like a really well choreographed martial arts movie, in which what you're conscious of is seeing something, because quite often there's one of him and many of other people, and it's all done, you get quite long master shots. So I did enjoy that. I thought that sort of cinematic quality was very good. In terms of the narrative is clear enough. It's a fantasy narrative, obviously, but the way in which the film just moves him to a series of eye-catching locations. It's a stunning desert. Look at that. He's walking up the side of a massive sand dune. I'm sure there was a quicker way. If you could have walked round it, but he looks better when he's at the top of it. There is a showdown in a glass room entirely surrounded by glass and mirrors and entirely surrounded by glass cabinets in which are an assortment of glass skulls into which people and things crash and smash and bash in a way which actually did provoke laughter in the screening, as did that scene in the library. And I think that what this had was that sense of exuberance, that sense of, as I said, of choreography, of, kind of balletic oomph. You get, Angelica Houston doing that, absolutely enjoying chewing the scenery in front of ballet, playing out in the background. The connection is made very clear. And everybody appeared to be having a good time. But the most important thing was that the film itself felt frenetic enough to keep building upon those, set piece after set piece after set piece, in which you kind of have to up the ante. And I think they did get the balance of humour and, and action right. And some of the fight sequences are quite exhausting. I mean, you do actually feel very exhausted at the end of it.
I mean, the whole film is a fight scene, really.
Yes, it is. There are certain lulls in it, and there are certain bits that I think, sort of pile through slightly better than others. But personally, I thought that that whole combination of frenetic action, the reference to Harold Lloyd is very, very spot on. As I said, it reminded...
He's a really keen student of cinema. When he did that documentary about
Side by Side,
he was amazingly knowledgeable. He really puts a lot of himself and his intellect into this as well.
Oh yeah, no, I mean he absolutely immerses himself in the role, and as I said, because it's such a physical role, and I've always really admired physical performance. I do think, it's something that is underrated. If somebody's a brilliant dancer, they say, they're a brilliant dancer. But if somebody can talk well, they say they're a brilliant actor. Well, why is it that dancing isn't, why is it that you don't win Best Actor Oscars for dancing? Or for fighting, because it's actually part and parcel of, that is what it is. It's
that was a question you were asking me.
Oh, no, I was asking hypothetical. I was rhetorical. It's Quantum Baby.